out of the book of Genesis, and we're all going to roll right on over into Exodus chapter 1, verse 1, and go through the book of Exodus after we finish this out. I was looking back at my other notebook, which has notes in it that when we began this study, we actually began this study on June 17th of 2020. So now it's, 2022, getting down toward the end, so we're now, 2.5 years into it. You know, when we first started this, I mentioned 2 or 3 times, based on how long it took us to go through the book of Luke, it was going to take us about 10 years to cover the book of Genesis. But we found out that there were chapters in Genesis that we could flow through a little bit quicker than what we anticipated. So, Jeff, we was a little bit wrong with our projection, you see. So, but anyway, that's okay. I got a feeling that the book of Exodus is probably going to take a little bit longer than what we did in Genesis. Depends upon how detailed we go into about it. So, but anyway, it's been a good study. It's been an interesting study, and it's going to continue to be interesting, especially when we get over into, we're in the 48th chapter now, into the 49th chapter, where all the sons are going to receive a blessing. It's kind of interesting at how those blessings were and how much the prophecy that Jacob made about those offsprings would be. Very accurate, very detailed at how and what they would become. But anyway, right now we're in Genesis chapter 48, and I'm going to kind of pick up, and I think we got a little bit farther than this last week, but I'm going to kind of pick up where the sons of Joseph now are being brought to Jacob. And that's going to be Ephraim and Manasseh. And we know that Manasseh was the older of the 2 children born to Joseph in Egypt, and Ephraim was the younger. But what's going to become interesting is that which one of them is going to get the blessing from Joseph. And so we find that these 2 sons, and now beginning in verse 5, my 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they are mine. So we find that Jacob is going to adopt, if you will, these 2 sons as if they are his. And this is where the last of the 12 tribes, if you will, are going to come in from. So these are adopted sons being brought in formally to the lineage and prosperity of Jacob. And there was a comment here made that he's going to treat Ephraim and Manasseh just as he's going to treat Reuben and Simeon. We find that, Reuben and Simeon were the first and second born of Israel. So he looked at Ephraim and Manasseh just like he would his first and second born. Although we know that the lineage, when we get over to chapter 49, I don't want to jump there too much when we're talking about Ephraim and Manasseh and all this other, because it's pretty somewhat detailed, if you will, in chapter 49. We know that the promise and lineage is going to come through the fourth born, or Judah. Seems as though Simeon and Reuben and those guys, they had disqualified themselves because of their actions and attitude that had taken place. And Jacob is going to remind them of some of the things that they had done about the treachery and lying and killing and all this kind of thing that they had done. So they actually disqualified themselves as being the lead people in the children of Israel. And yet we know that God went on to prosper them greatly. We kind of look at these characters here and the importance of them, and we do know some things about them. Do we know a powerful lot about it? We don't, because we know the Bible is going to shift gears later on, and primarily going to concern itself with the lineage of the tribe of Judah, through which came the great kings, David and those guys through the lineage of Christ. But as we're going to look at some of these promises, these tribes like Manasseh and Ephraim and Gad and Naphtali, they're going to be like the supporting characters to help support this thing, to help God's plan come through. Matter of fact, we're going to find several of these tribes are very prominent in supplying armies or troops to the children of Israel. So these tribes are very important in the eyes of God. Liken it kind of unto maybe a movie or a television show. You know, a television show has its prominent characters, doesn't it? You know, there's usually 2, 3, or 4 prominent characters that the episode or the show is about, isn't it? And they're the primaries. They're the ones that carry the show on. They're the ones that see it through. They're the ones that receive the glory or whatever. But have you ever noticed on the credits how many people it takes to make that happen? So would you say that the supporting role of the stage production, the director's group, and the film crew, if you'll look and see at the credits, sometimes it goes on and on and on and on, doesn't it? Well, are they important? Yes, they are. How so? Well, without the film crew, even though you got all the main characters, you still don't have a movie, do you? Without the production crew making the sets and scenes and clothing and stuff like that, guess what you still don't have? So they're very important, aren't they? Each segment has its own individual work that it does to bring it to fruition. So maybe kind of liken these tribes to that. They are important from the standpoint they're going to help bring the promises of God to fruition. Okay? Even though they're not the direct one to receive the promise, other than the promised land, through that will come Judah, but they're very important indeed. So you're going to find that Ephraim and Manasseh, as they come into this thing, Jacob is going to treat them just like he would his own first 2 born. And we know with Reuben and Simeon, Reuben would have been the natural line of heir to the promise. But as we said, in God's eyes, he disqualified himself. And so we find Simeon disqualified himself, and so on and so forth. And we'll get more into that. We've already talked about that, but we'll get more into it in chapter 49. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because there's some events here that we need to cover before we get there. And so we find in verse 6, and thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in the inheritance. And so we're going to find that these tribes are going to be named, and the inheritance to come would be the promised land, and each tribe was going to have its own portion of that promised land in that inheritance. You know, one of the things that we notice here that may be kind of interesting, as we said, we're going to find the completion of what will become the 12 tribes of Israel as this thing unfolds. 12 is kind of an interesting number, like other numbers in the Bible. Don't know if you've ever noticed it or not, at how many times 12 occurs over and over in the Bible. The thought on that is that the number 12 generally is associated with governmental type perfection, oversight perfection. Notice here that we have, there are the 12 tribes. There were the 12 apostles. There were the 12 princesses of Ishmael. There were 12 pillars on Moses' altar. There were 12 stones on the high priest's breast. There were 12 cakes of showbread, 12 silver platters, 12 spies to search out the land, 12 in each group of musicians and singers for Israel's worship, 12 months in a year, 12 hours in a day, talking about daylight, so it's got it divided up 12 hours day, 12 hours night. It has a general rule, and we know we kind of see the seasonal change in that, but that is the general rule. And so we find there were 12 men filled with the Holy Spirit. There were 12,000 gathered from the 12 tribes, and when we look at what the writer of Revelation says figuratively, there's 12 foundations in the New Jerusalem. There's 12,000 furlongs, and the tree of life in heaven has 12 fruits. So the number 12 seems to be a significant number in the Bible, like other numbers do, like the number 7 and the number 3 and things of that nature. So, and those things are done to show figuratively the importance of governmental perfection. And that's what you're seeing here being brought about with the addition of Ephraim and Manasseh. Now you have this thing coming together in its completeness and its entirety. But anyway, Jacob now refers back to himself. He says in the very next verse of verse 7, "As for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way." when yet there was but a little way unto Ephraim. And I buried her there in the way of Ephraim, the same is Bethlehem. And Israel, behold, Joseph's sons, and said, who are these? And so, he makes reference back to bearing Rachel. And you find him referring back to her more, and this is where he wants to be buried in the end, in the promised land. You're going to find when you get into chapter 49, he's going to give some detail about being buried there in the land of his forefathers. One of the things, too, we're going to find about Jacob, that was kind of interesting. He is going to be the last of the great patriarchs. You had a continuation of these patriarchs, you may as well say, from before the flood to after the flood. Now you got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be one of the last. We're also going to find that Jacob is going to be one of the first to give a form of prophecy from a human standpoint of view. If you'll notice, God has been speaking directly to these people and these workers, and he still will for a period of time, but you're going to start seeing prophecy coming to being, that God's going to use man for these prophetical works that are to come. So, so far in Genesis, we've seen a lot of first, haven't we? And rightfully so, because it is the beginning, isn't it? And so we find that these things are going to come to fruition. And so we find that, Jacob's eyes now, they're becoming dim. He doesn't see as well as he used to when he was younger. And so he asked Joseph, who are these? And Joseph said unto him in verse 9, they are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray them to me, and I will bless them. And so we find that Jacob, we're going to see that he's very thankful that he got not only to live to see Joseph, but to see Joseph's offsprings also. And he's going to give them a blessing. And so we find that the eyes in verse 10, as we said, of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see it. He brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. So, that was a greeting of being glad to see someone there, similar to our greeting today. Especially if we've never seen someone and we had wonder and concern about them, and especially with family like this right here, that embrace and kissing, that was a big deal, wasn't it? Especially when he thought Joseph had no idea there was offspring to Joseph was even alive. That had to be quite an overwhelming feeling in the life of Jacob. And so we find that Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God has showed me also thy seed. And we just commented on that, didn't we? He said, I never thought I'd see your face again. And not only have I seen your face, but I've seen your children also. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And notice this. Joseph brought them out from between his knees. Where was Joseph? How were they in this? Joseph was a great ruler. He was a great king. You didn't see Joseph bow down to anybody. But you see him in respect to his father, don't you? Yes, because kind of interested in it. At whom he recognized has authority in his life. Of course, he recognized God, but he also remembered the respectfulness to his father. And Joseph took them, in verse 13, both Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. Now this is going to become problematic for Joseph, because Ephraim now is the younger. So Joseph's going to begin to think, well, my father's eyes are dim. He doesn't realize what he's doing. But come to find out, he does realize what he's doing. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. Who was he younger? And his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hand wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So wittingly, Joseph, he knew what he was doing. Manasseh, so, as it says here, he was older. It was in line for him to receive the primary part of the blessing. And notice what he's going to do, verse 15. And he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long until this day. I'm going to pause right there because it's real interesting about the God who fed me. Really, your translation, or some translations may say shepherd. God has shepherded me all these days long. In other words, God had protected me just like a shepherd would his sheep all these days long. And you can use the word fed too, because it was God that fed him, wasn't it? And made him prosper and carry him through the land. And so we find, as we look here, God had fed me all my life until this day. And the angel which redeemed me from all evil. The angel that redeemed me from all evil. I don't know how your translation is reading. I'm looking at the New King James Version. This angel is capitalized. Generally, when you denote that capitalization like that, who's the angel is talking about? Jesus. And we're going to see this as we get over into chapter 49 at a comment that Jacob is going to make about his redemption before he dies. One of the last breaths that he's going to breathe. So we find that this angel hath redeemed me from all evil. Bless these lads. Bless these lads. And let my name be on them in the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And so we find that he's asking for the blessings of these angels, just like the angel that blessed him. He wants that same blessing upon Ephraim and Manasseh. It's kind of interesting when you stop and look at it and how this is working out. And you know, it seems as though too Jacob is recognizing that, you know, it's not my power or my will that's being carried out here. It's the power and will of God that's being carried out here, involving the blessings of these two. You know, we find as we look at this, the intendance of the right hand in the Bible carries some interesting weight with it. The right hand is associated with God's strength. Exodus 15 and chapter 6. It's noted with favor in Psalm 16:11. The right hand is noted for help in Psalms 20 and 6. This is why Jesus is described as sitting at the right hand of God the Father, Mark 14:62. And I think maybe we know things about that which is on the right and that which is the left. We still use that symbolism today, don't we? Maybe not in the strictest sense as the Bible uses, but generally we think that which is right is on the right hand and that which is not right is on the left hand, don't we? Well, that principle, this is where it comes from. Okay? So it's an old principle of the right and the left. So we find that these things are very biblical in nature, and that we still adhere to somewhat in principle this very day. And so we find that Joseph saw, verse 17, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim the younger, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim unto Manasseh's head. So we saw Joseph now is kind of perplexed about this. He's going to swap this up. Now, you know, he's thinking, well, my father can't see what he's doing. But yet we find that really the guide in all this was God, wasn't it? And you know, and maybe rightfully so that Jacob may not could see, because he couldn't come back and say, I have done this blessing. Notice what he said here. He said, the angel blessed these lads. You know, so he's giving God the credit for these blessings on him. He's giving God the credit for what's going on here. Now, Joseph may not can readily recognize it, but you know, Jacob recognizes what's going on here. And Joseph said unto his father, verse 18, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused. No, I'm not going to do that. And said, I know it, my son, I know it. He shall also become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations," talking about Manasseh becoming great. And we're going to find that as we get over into it. I don't want to get too wrapped up in their blessing right this minute, because when you get into chapter 49, there's more said about that. Okay? But one of the things that we've noticed in this, that very often the firstborn doesn't receive the blessing, does he? You know, God's looking at the long-term character of what's going on here. And so we see again here this blessing. You know, we find that, well, I had a thought there, Jeff, you done fled from me, so I'm going to move on, okay? Then I'll come back to it if I think about it. How about that? "And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh, and set Ephraim before Manasseh." And so we're going to find that this is a blessing from God, and God has a purpose and plan for setting the younger above the older. "And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you and bring you again unto the land of your fathers." And so, you know, we find Jacob is really putting forth a piece of prophecy here and he's really echoing what God had told, you know, Abraham and Isaac and all about they're going to receive that promised land. Yet it was going to take a while for that to become fulfilled, wasn't it? It was going to take a while for that to bring about. "And moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow." And so we find that he's talking about a portion given to them that he had taken by his hand, by the bow, when he was there back in that land. And you know, you look at that, and Joshua 24:32 seems to make note of what Jacob is talking about here. It seems as though while he was in that land, he had taken some of it by force, by military account, from the Amorites. Joshua 24:32. Let's see, where are we at here? I'm just going to look over here. Where am I at? Joshua. Talks about the bones. Okay, Joshua 24:32. "And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried he in Shechem in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought from Hamor, the sons of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph." That's not the passage of Scripture I was thinking about. There's a comment made here about that. It seems as though there was a parcel of that land that he had taken by force, and I'll get my notes straightened out. I'll get back on that next week. So that was going to be given unto them. So we find that that's going to conclude chapter 48. Any of you brethren have any comments that you want to make on that chapter 48? You know, one of the things we find, and we've talked about it, I'm just going to kind of go over it now, and we talked about the shadow and type of Joseph being a type of what was to come in Christ. And you know, we find there's scarcely any personal type in the Old Testament which is more clearly and fully portrayed of our Lord Jesus Christ than a type of Joseph. And there's a couple of things here that was listed that Brother Gaddis Roy didn't have in his. And I was just going to kind of briefly hit on some of these things. You know, we find that Joseph was like a shepherd. He was loved by his father. He was sent unto his brethren, and we talked about all that. He was hated by his brothers. He prophesied his coming glory. He was rejected by his brothers. He endured unjust punishment from his brothers. He was sentenced to the pit. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver. He was handed over to the Gentiles. He was regarded as dead, but was raised out of the pit. He went to Egypt. He was made a servant, tempted severely, but did not sin. And we think about that. about Jesus being tempted by the devil. In Matthew chapter 4, the devil took him to the highest mountain point and showed him the kingdoms of the world. He was falsely accused. He made no defense. We think about Jesus, a picture of him in all those things. He endured unjust punishment from the Gentiles. He was associated with two other criminals. We think about the baker and the butler. One was pardoned, one was not. Well, that's what happened to the two that were crucified with Jesus. Well, one was pardoned, one was not. Joseph showed compassion. He brought a message of deliverance in prison, wanting to be remembered, shown to have divine wisdom, recognized as having the Spirit of God, and yet betrayed by those he thought was his friends. He was honored among the Gentiles while still being despised and forgotten by his brethren. And we think about Jesus maybe more on that in maybe a modern term about how today, Jesus is still despised amongst those that should have known him. Orthodox Jews still today don't recognize Jesus as the Son of God. But he's recognized greatly by the Gentile world. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? This was kind of an interesting thought. In his second appearing, he did not go first to his brethren. They came to him. And it's kind of interesting it brings up this second appearing unto him. We know they appeared unto Joseph the first time. Now, that may be an analogy, a shadow of Jesus appearing the first time on this earth to get his mission completed. We'll also tie it into this about when his brethren came the second time, he made himself known to his brethren at his second appearance. So who is Jesus' brethren today that he's going to be made known at his second appearance? Be the church one. Kind of interested in it. All these shadows and types, and we could go on and on. As a matter of fact, this list that I'm laying down here, that was compiled many years ago. Instead of having 14 or 18 jail, there's 50 of them. So we could talk about this for a while, couldn't we? And we know that because we kept adding to the list of these things, didn't we? We find that Joseph prepared a place for his brethren. Jesus is going to prepare a place for us today, hasn't he? His brethren. And I thought this was real interesting. He brought both Jew and Gentile together in the land of Egypt. Jesus reconciled both Jew and Gentile together in the church, didn't he? Kind of interested. There's a whole lot of this, and like I said, there's about 50 of them, and I'm not going to go through all of them because it would be a study in itself. And maybe sometime we come back to that and we'll use that in some lessons, and we'll go through each and every one of them and pull out book, chapter, and verse for them. It might be interesting to look at that. So, anyway, that concludes chapter 48. Chapter 49, very interesting chapter. Jacob is getting ready to die, and he's going to pronounce blessings on his sons, including the adopted sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And it's kind of interesting at what he's going to bring out to these boys about, why is this and why is that, and here's what you're going to be in this supporting role to make God's plan come about. And anyway, in verse 1 of chapter 49, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So we find that Jacob is calling them together, and that's still a custom and principle that I think's been adhered to down through the ages, hasn't it? Normally, when a patriarch or head of a household or a parent or a grandparent or someone like that gets ready to pass away, a lot of times the family will gather around, won't they? And if there's any breath of life left in them, there will be some type of a sympathetic comment made, or maybe even a blessing given. We know back then, as far as we can tell, at this point in time, there's really nothing like a will, was there? So all this was being done verbally. They did have contracts and things, but all these children were here to hear the blessing. Now, on a side note, I'm going to tell something to kind of make a little break in my discussion here. An incident that actually happened when I was a kid about the children being gathered around a deathbed. One of the neighbors out there up the country there where I was raised got sick. He was an older man, and he was in the hospital there in Franklin. And I can remember as a kid, Daddy and I going down to the hospital to see him. Well, I remember distinctly as we was going down the corridor to his room, you could hear kind of some loud talking and commotion going on. Okay? What in the world was that? Something must have happened. He must have done passed on. Well, when we got there, it was pretty obvious there was some serious discussion going on amongst all of them. And so I remember Daddy rapping on the door, and we walked in, and he recognized Daddy. And Daddy said, what are you doing down here? Don't you need to be home? You know, has a way of opening and kind of encouraging him. And he said, Bob, he said, these kids come down here and they ain't done nothing. There's about 5 or 6 of them in there. All they done is fussed over who gonna get what. He said, they ain't getting nothing. I'm going home. The room got deathly quiet. Did you know he went home? Got better and went home. And Eric, I know Jeff, y'all have seen it, but Eric, that piece of property on the road, there's a gate that leads down to where the timber company joins our property. That was his property. Daddy wanted to buy it from him. He had made him an offer on it, but somewhere or another in the mix, off the cuff, he sold it to the paper company. Guess what the kids got? So, you know, sometimes all that don't work out like that, does it? So, anyway, I thought that as a side note about blessing. Sometimes it can be good, Jeff, and sometimes it may not be so good. But I remember that like it was yesterday. And anyway, he called them together, and he's going to tell them, you know, what's going to be followed during these last times. And the last days referred to here is not the end of time. It's talking about the days in which they were going to inherit. The last days of them being in Egyptian bondage and coming out and inheriting the promised land. And so we find, he says, gather yourselves together, and hear ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. So, you know, this is another way of saying, okay, now it's time for everybody to pay attention. I'm fixing to, you know, lay down my will and testament, if you will. These are the blessings that you're going to receive. And it's kind of interesting. Of course, he starts here with Reuben, the firstborn. Thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. Excellence of dignity and excellency of power. But you are unstable as water. You shall not excel. What does that mean, unstable as water? Well, today, we use it very often about electricity taking the path of least resistance. You know, somebody being weak overall in matter. Well, back then they didn't have electricity. And have you ever noticed water, when you pour it out on something, that it'll flow, but when it comes to an obstacle, it stops, right? And it'll build up to go around the obstacle. That's what he's talking about. That's how Reuben was. He was like electricity. He took the path of least resistance. He was not very stable in heart and mind. He says, you will not excel. Why won't you excel? Because you went up unto your father's bed, then you defiled it, and he went up to my couch. And what I'm going to do is, because there's a lot said in this, I'm going to kind of have to rely heavily on my notes, trying to remember what the bullet points is and all these blessings. My old brain, it ain't quite functional like it, so I'm going to rely heavily on these notes. Okay? Let me bring that closer. Of course, I know you young guys like down there and read over, and y'all can just read it off like this, you see, you know. Okay, you are my firstborn. As the firstborn of the family, Reuben had claim to the inheritance rights of the firstborn. But he forfeited through pride, we're going to see. If you remember Reuben's immorality with his father's concubine, the mother of his brothers Dan and Bethuel is recorded in Genesis 35:22. And we talked about that, about that affair that he had with his father's concubine back then, many years earlier. This happened. And so he's referred to as being unstable as water. Because of Reuben's instability, the birthright was divided. And so we find that God looks for stable character in those who will lead his people. You should not excel. As far as we can tell, the tribe of Reuben never did excel. There was no prophet, no judge, or no king that we know of that came out from the tribe of Reuben. And this may be an example of what Jesus is talking about in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 30. The first shall be last. You know? Kind of makes that point, doesn't it? That Reuben, being the firstborn, yet excelled at nothing and was last in the kingdom. You know? So, anyway, it was just a thought. So, the preacher Spurgeon, I said, so a man may have great opportunities and lose them. Uncontrolled passion may make him very little, who otherwise might have been great. And so we find that Reuben did not receive the inheritance as the firstborn. As a matter of fact, he was not going to excel at all. We find that Simeon and Levi, he says, I'm going to scatter them in Israel. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are they in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And so we find the second-born son and the third-born son, Simeon and Levi, received the same words for the evil deeds they had done. They were instruments of cruelty when they wiped out all the men of Shechem in retaliation for the act that was conducted against their sister Dinah. Genesis chapter 34, verses 25 through 29. And remember that, where they had all the men circumcised, and then they went in there and killed all of them. So, one of the things that this will do, that their life illustrates, is the principles that sin of our past can come back to haunt us. Even though God may have forgiven us, they still may carry consequences we must face for a lifetime. It kind of goes back to the old adage, be careful what you do, because it may come back to haunt you. And there are things, that go on in life, no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you want it, no matter how good a person you become, no matter how great a Christian you become, there are things that you can't undo. And Reed and I talked about this a little bit Wednesday night about the Apostle Paul. If maybe some of that we're reading about is the Apostle Paul, as he writes those things in his writings, maybe you can see a hint. He was still haunted by his past. Even though God had forgiven him, and even though he became a great man of God, there were still things in his past that haunted him. There are things that went on there that he couldn't change, no matter how much he wanted to. He couldn't change. So anyway, we find that this is what we see in Simeon and Levi. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce. The real problem with Simeon and Levi was their anger. In their anger, they slew a man. Their anger was sin because it was rooted in self-will. And in their self-will, they became hamstrung like an ox. The Bible speaks of godly anger in Ephesians 4:26. But there is such a thing as ungodly anger, bitterness, wrath, anger, let it be put away from you. The difference often is that there is godly righteous anger, and what that anger does, it stirs up an emotion in us to get us to act. But then there's that self-willed anger that causes us to react in a manner not becoming what Christ would have us to act. You know, therein lies that anger that begins to develop malice and ill will and jealousy and envy and strife and all that kind of stuff coming into being, you see. Seems like Simeon and Levi was more of that type than the other type. We find that the tribe of Simeon was the weakest numerically of the 12, Numbers 26:14. And they actually shared an allotment of the land with Judah in Joshua 19 and verse 1. The tribe of Simeon became small during the wilderness wandering. They started out from Egypt being the third largest tribe, but some 35 years later at the second wilderness census of Israel, 63% of that tribe perished, and they became the smallest tribe, Numbers 26:14. I'll stop right there. My clock is telling me, David, that it's time to get ready for the worship service. Okay?